Charles Pellegrin, our business editor, is getting emotional as well. That is the deadline imposed by the US President Donald Trump on Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz approaches. And guess what? Oil prices are rising again, Charles.
Donald Trump's threatened to obliterate Iran's energy infrastructure and bridges if his demands aren't met by 8 p.m. Eastern Time this Tuesday. Among those demands is freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway separating the Persian Gulf from the Arabian Sea and through which about a fifth of the world's supply of oil and natural gas used to transit through. Well, those threats, which amount to war crimes under the Geneva Convention, have been received negatively on international markets, crude markets, as you can see, with the global Brent crude benchmark rising above the $111 a barrel mark. As for equities, shares in Asia have shown a lot of volatility in this unstable geopolitical context. East Asian countries, especially reliant on its imported Middle Eastern oil and natural gas. A mixed picture this Tuesday. As you can see, the Kospi and the Nikkei slightly higher, but from a very low base compared to before the war. European shares, meanwhile, reopened this Tuesday after the long Easter weekend, cautiously higher as well. Again, once again, from a very low base when you think about where they stood before the war. The CAC 40 in Paris up just under 0.5% higher.
Well, the volatility we've seen in markets in recent weeks, excuse me, has a lot to do, of course, from mixed messaging coming from Donald Trump.
Well, a few days ago, the U.S. president was talking about potentially withdrawing U.S. forces, even if the Strait of Hormuz wasn't open to traffic, and letting other affected countries deal with the situation themselves. But he was asked by reporters on Monday whether he thought resuming regular traffic through the strait was a priority. And here's what he said.
I would say it's a very big priority because see, that's one thing that's a little different than other things. We can bomb the hell out of them. We can knock them out for a loop. But to close the strait, all you need is one terrorist. We have to have a deal that's acceptable to me. And part of that deal is going to be we want free traffic of oil and everything else.
Yeah, Donald Trump there. Interestingly enough, Sean, there has been some traffic, hasn't there, going through the strait?
Yes, all with the approval of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and with the payment of a toll over the past few weeks. The system started developing by which vessels would make contact with the IRGC, asking for safe passage, and after the appropriate checks and payments were completed, these vessels made it through the strait. One Wall Street firm called Citrini Research actually sent an analyst to the Hormuz Strait to physically check on maritime traffic there, and his findings corroborated this idea of an Iranian toll booth, saying vessels are still moving through the strait with about 15 ships passing daily in recent days, much less than before the war started, but still 15, all with their transponders turned off, so that wouldn't show up on maritime tracking data. The conclusion of the research being that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is deciding who can and can't pass.
And ironically, Donald Trump's latest threat escalation might actually have slowed down that traffic as well.
Yeah, well, two Qatar liquefied natural gas tankers, the Al Dayan and the Rashida, who were heading towards the Strait of Hormuz, were halted by the IRGC on Monday without explanation and then reversed course, as you can see on these maps provided by marinetraffic.com. Iran had permitted the vessels to transit the strait under an agreement reached with the U.S. last week via Pakistani mediation, according to sources speaking to Reuters. And they were initially bound to Pakistan and China. And had they successfully crossed, well, they would have been the first liquefied natural gas cargoes to make it through the waterway since the start of the war. And this is what's leading some to the conclusion that U.S. threat escalation is really further straining international crude supply within this context.
Well, for this next story, we're going to come to France. Obviously, though, all linked to exactly what Charles has been talking about. A massive jump in the price of diesel fuel having a particularly onerous effect on the country's drivers.
French economic policies from the 1970s and 80s turned the country into one of the most diesel-dependent nations in the Western world. But less and less of the fuel is being refined in France, leading to price spikes at the pump even more pronounced than for gasoline, and leading French drivers who rely on their diesel cars to scramble for solutions as their budgets are increasingly squeezed. Brian Quinn has more.
In northern France, where public transport is limited, getting around without a car is nearly impossible, and many of them run on diesel. With prices at the pump on the rise, many families are cutting back on driving to save money.
We used to go to the pool on Wednesdays, not anymore. We go out to eat maybe once a month.
The rise of nuclear power plants in France during the 1970s and 80s put the country's fuel oil refiners into crisis. To avoid a collapse of the industry, the French government encouraged the adoption of diesel-powered cars and heavily subsidized the fuel itself. By the early 2000s, some 80% of France's private cars ran on diesel. But amid increasing awareness of diesel's heavy contribution to air pollution and a major gap in public finances, the country's budget watchdog in 2013 called for an end to special tax breaks on the fuel. These days, French gasoline supplies are nearly 100% refined domestically, but more than half the country's diesel is imported, making it more susceptible to supply shocks. The result, prices at the pump have risen much faster for diesel than for gasoline. 48% of the French public still drive diesel cars, but with the average cost of a liter now above €2.30, many are considering a change. After 20 years on diesel, this family is now shopping for a hybrid.
The price of fuel plus maintenance, it's just too expensive to have a diesel car now.
It's a big investment, though, and one that could take years to pay off.
Charles, thanks a lot. Charles Pellegrin there with business for us on France 24.